Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today, we'll be talking about the upcoming US presidential election. Now, 3rd of November isn't far anymore. The interesting part is that it's a very, very close contest as far as I can say, because when you look at the overall states, I mean, obviously the swing states would matter, and a lot of youngsters, they've been kind of persuaded to go out and vote by both sides, whether the Democrats or the Republicans. Interestingly, even in the previous election, we never thought that Mr. Donald Trump is going to win, but that was a huge surprise when it happened. So today in our program, we'll be talking about, will Trump accept election result? Now, that is again something very, very important, and there are a few reasons for that also. Maybe the timings of the announcement of the elections, and the second is about the number of voters or the turnout. That is also going to matter a lot, and the impact of the US election on the world politics. Primarily when we talk about the global politics, obviously the President of the United States of America matters, whether we admit it or we don't. So that is going to be something pretty interesting we'll be talking about. And then US elections, what's at stake for Pakistan? So what is at stake for Pakistan? Well, there are certain quarters who wish that Trump should win, and there are certain quarters who really think that it should be the other way around. But why Trump or why Biden? What difference will it make? Again, that is another important question we'll be throwing light on. Let me introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio on my right is Atif Shikoh Saab. He's an expert on foreign affairs and international relations. Thank you very much, Shikoh Saab, for your time. And we have with us Dr. Nazir Mahmood Saab. Nazir Mahmood Saab is a senior columnist, senior journalist. Thank you very much, sir. And we'll be also joined in by Bariza Umar. She is a socio-cultural analyst based in Washington, D.C., and she's going to join us on Skype in a little while. So, well, gentlemen, once again, thank you very much for your time, sir. Now, the topic is pretty interesting. Exactly almost 4 years ago, same table, same studio, and we thought that it could be the lady, Hillary Clinton, as the first female president. It didn't happen, though the number of votes versus the college electoral and all, this is pretty interesting also, that what difference does it make. But having said that, contest is very close. There are certain areas where Biden has an edge. There are certain areas where Trump already has an edge. But it seems that this is going to be one hell of an election in the history of the United States of America. Trump says, well, he is not going to accept if he loses because he's so sure about his win. Biden, on the other hand, is a very seasoned contestant, I would say, has served as a vice president also along with Barack Obama. And his experience would matter a lot as well. Your take, sir. Shikoh Saab.
Well, you mentioned about 4 years ago that you were thinking Hillary would be successful. You weren't alone in that. I think that was like 90% of the media all around the world. This is an election like no other. I think what Donald Trump did by sort of stepping back from the leadership of the global leadership that actually does fall to the US. It really is an election like no other, because no election has taken place in a pandemic before. And no other election in the US history has allowed for mail-in ballots by all of the states. So they don't have to walk into, there were mail-in ballots allowed, but you needed a specific reason why you could mail in your vote. Now, all the states have allowed mail-in ballots, and that has really changed this election completely.
Do you think the voter turnout would matter? Because the youth vote would really make a difference, I would say, and the non-white votes as well, whether you talk about the Spanish vote or the black vote or the Muslim vote for that matter. What is your take on that?
Of course, great point. So the non-white vote, the Latin American, black and Asian and Muslim vote accounts for 1/3 of eligible voters now. And some of the policies that Republicans, rightly or wrongly, have pursued, rightly or wrongly, have been perceived as anti-immigrant, anti-non-white. So that is a huge challenge for the Republican Party as such.
All right. Now, moving on to you, Dr. Saab, couple of important areas to talk about. Now, let's start off from the East Coast. Let's start off from the New York side, New Jersey, Boston, all the way down. Now, historically, these are still the Democratic supporters, majority of them. I mean, they've been one, including, we'll talk about the Western side also. But looking at the population, look at the kind of role, looking at the overall difference that Mr. Donald Trump claims he has made. I mean, when it comes to Corona, we all know what has happened, what kind of an interview was aired yesterday in the Russian television network. And then so many other differences that are coming out now with the president, especially regarding the tackling of coronavirus. Do you think that is going to be the major issue? Because now there is a second wave and that could be lethal than the first one.
It has become a very, perhaps in the last week also, it has become probably the most important issue. Because initially Trump tried to play it down, but now with around 230,000 deaths, which is, approaching quarter of a million.
And the number is increasing, sir.
Quarter of a million, nearly. It's a big number. And in the span of time, just 6-7 months? So it's a big number. So it has, and there is no doubt that Trump has mishandled this. First, initially he just tried to take it easy, brush it under the carpet and say, no, it is just a flu and it will go away. So this high number of deaths and high number of infections, 9 million infections is a very high number, 9 million. So I think COVID has become a very important issue, and Democratic candidates, both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they have highlighted the incompetence of Republican Party very, very effectively. And especially as you mentioned on the northeastern coast, because New York was one of the areas which was the most affected areas.
Yes.
And it has also, if you look at the detailed statistics, most of the people who were affected and died in this pandemic, they belong to minority groups, underprivileged groups, and who did not have any medical coverage also. And especially Trump has been against Obamacare throughout. So this has played a role.
Couldn't provide
also
an alternative. I mean, that is again,
and there was no alternative also. So this is COVID is also playing a role. And coming back to your earlier question about postal ballots, well, there were initially postal ballots.
That is one of the major issues at the moment, sir.
Interestingly, in the United States, the rules are very variable in all the states. If you look at the western states like Washington State, Oregon, California, they have different rules. There now everybody was supposed to vote remotely in the western states, Oregon, Washington State and California. Then there are middle states, they had a different rules, like there they could go and cast in person, and they could also send ballot without a reason.
So people are also talking about this drive-through voting system as well.
And then there are some states where they have to give a reason. Otherwise, they are not. The reason can be maybe they are over 65, they are suffering from something, they are ill, they cannot go.
A justified reason not
justify,
to
or
vote.
the polling booth is too far away. So there are 2-3 reasons that they can identify. So and then interestingly, in America, the rules also depend. This collection of ballots and counting, this federation has no role in that. Federal government has no role in that. This is done only by the state itself. They collect the ballots, they count it, and they submit the results to the central authority.
Now, the question about transparency is going to be very important as well, as Trump says that there is no point that he could lose. And if he loses, I mean, it is going to be
he has already given
unfair.
He has already given an indication that he is not going to easily accept. But no, there are systems. Courts are very effective, just like, it reminds us of 2000.
So every country has an establishment, whether in the form of, when in America, you look at the role of CIA for that matter, Pentagon, your military establishment in USA, or even judiciary. I mean, these are the most powerful institutions, and they make the difference. So, if you allow me, let me also bring in Bariza in the conversation. Assalamu alaikum ji.
Welcome.
Ma'am, thank you very much for taking your time out and talking to PTV World. Now, a couple of points. Since you're based in Washington, D.C., how does it feel, ma'am? I mean, there has to be something in the air that could give you some sort of an idea, or is it neck to neck kind of a competition?
Well, over here, it really doesn't feel like it's neck to neck. Just outside of DC, and I honestly saw my first Trump sign on a home yesterday. So people are far more visibly supportive, it seems, of the Biden camp over here. Right now in DC, there are again protests happening because of a young black man who died during a police chase the other day. So the story over here is not so focused on the election. The idea seems to be that 4 years ago the polls predicted Hillary was going to win, and therefore did not feel it necessary to go out and vote. But this time, people are not making that mistake, and there is some worry about whether there will be a peaceful transition of power, because that is tradition. It's not really enshrined anywhere that someone has to make the concession speech. That's just how it's always been. So if this is going to go into the courts, and now with a 6-3 majority for the conservatives, what that might mean, the concern seems to be over there. But I don't think that it feels like there's going to be a loss for the Biden camp.
All right. Now there's another point. I mean, we were earlier talking about the voter turnout. I think that is going to also make a lot of difference. And secondly, there are various ways, various methods, I would say, to cast the vote in the United States of America. Ma'am, what about the level of transparency there? I mean, obviously earlier, I still remember when the selection was going on between George W. Bush and President Al Gore. I remember the issue was again regarding Florida. In the previous election, again, it was about Florida. Florida most likely plays the key role in the US elections. So primarily, ma'am, number one, tell us about the level of transparency and the kind of trust people have in those sort of procedures.
Well, there used to be a lot more trust in the system than there is now, because of the even back in 2000, when there was no question of voter fraud, that suddenly became the chant of voter fraud to make people mistrust the court system, and have that all just, let's have a quick end to this. And the Republican Party has latched on to the phrase voter fraud, and this particular president has really been pushing that. And so now I think there has been quite an erosion of trust. The courts seem to be pretty they seem to be working in a way that would not disenfranchise too many voters. In Texas, they just upheld the constitutionality of the drive-through voting, which was an interesting case, given that Texas is red. The idea of whether mail-in ballots can be counted past election day, that's going to vary from state to state. But I think as long as every vote is counted and it is incontrovertible that there is such a huge lead on one side or the other, it's really not going to come to a point where he can claim a victory at all if the margin of error is not that large. That is very large.
If you listen to one of these statements issued by President Donald Trump, he says that he's preparing for legal challenges to vote counts. I mean, if he's preparing for legal counts, means that somewhere down he believes that he could lose the election. But at the same time, I mean, there's this contingency plan he has, you know, to challenge the result if in case he loses. If he wins, then he would definitely say that everything was just fine, you know, because it went his way. Yeah, your take on that point, ma'am.
I am absolutely certain that he believes that he is to lose. Otherwise, he wouldn't be having 4 rallies a day. That is not the way a confident incumbent would usually campaign. And these rallies that he's been having, clearly COVID is not at the top of his mind at all, given that how many cases have come out from these rallies. There have been at least, I believe, 700 deaths that have been traced back to people who contracted the virus at one of his rallies. So he is definitely campaigning like a candidate who expects to lose, and he will be taking this to the courts if he does lose. And I think that's one of the reasons he was so quick to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And the Senate was so quick to do so that if this does go to the courts, they have a much better chance. But I really don't think that if the margin is very, very large, that there's any way that it's going to make any difference.
The next, I think, 96 hours would be really interesting. But ma'am, let me also introduce you to our two of our panelists in the studio. One is Mr. Shekau, he's an IR expert, and the other gentleman is Dr. Mahmood. He's a senior journalist, senior columnist, writer. Now, over to you, sir. Regarding the impact of US elections, I mean, whosoever wins, I mean, there are two again, as I earlier mentioned, schools, I would say school of thoughts. One is about if Trump wins the second term, well, wow, most likely the American forces would be, and the NATO forces would be out of Afghanistan, means that there could be a settlement regarding peace, and there could be a government formed there where there is a role of Taliban, as the Americans really want them to play a positive role now. Role of Pakistan has been identified. I think a lot has been done on war footing. But what if the traditional mindset comes back in the form of Mr. Joe Biden, that we'll see, we'll keep a certain number, we'll see the foreign policy, we'll revisit it, you know, these kind of questions. So primarily, I mean, this is going to be back to square one. All these efforts made by Zalmay Khalilzad or the Pakistani decision makers or so many other people or the stakeholders in general. Sir, your take.
Actually, when it comes to this region, Zalmay Khalilzad has done an amazing job. And Pakistan has actually reciprocated really well. But generally, when you communicate with NATO commanders, they shudder at every time that Trump opens his mouth. Traditionally, that is not how communication with NATO has happened, with US being the largest contributor to NATO. But everything is a surprise to NATO commanders now. Anything that comes out of, like just the other day, without any consultation with Germany, he decided he's pulling away thousands of soldiers that have been there since the Second World War. Now, when it comes to Afghanistan and pulling away of the forces, that is good for us, and if that leads to stability in the region. But the way they've been communicating and the way they've been implementing foreign policy has been disastrous in its own right. So a little bit of predictability coming in the form of Joe Biden might just not be the worst thing to happen to this region, if that leads to greater stability. It's just this surprising way of communication that Trump has with a stroke of a pen. This thing is gone. 40-year-old agreements are gone. Paris Accord, pulling out of Paris Accord.
The climate change issue, yeah?
Absolutely. Like in a second. Iran nuclear deal, the US pulling out of it. Like that has led to so much instability. The US, just a stroke of a pen, pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. So if it's a withdrawal from Afghanistan on the same lines as the US pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, that is, I'm not really certain if that is something that we should be rooting for.
Now, a couple of more important issues just mentioned by Shekau Saab, that JCPOA, one, you talk about the Afghan exit plan that is being lingering on for God knows how long. You talked about Paris Accord. But sir, prior to that, you started from NAFTA, NATO, those countries who were in dire straits as far as their economy is concerned, like Greece, France for that matter, they were forced to still continue buying 2% to 2.5% of their GDP. value in the form of purchase of weapons from the US. Good enough, sir. Certain checks on Russia, Chinese isolation, whatever is happening in the South China Sea, Afghan issue, Middle East. Positions regarding Saudi Arabia or UAE or Israel for that matter. There's a lot going on. The war in Yemen and so forth. I mean, you talk about issues and they exist. And the kind of decisions which were taken earlier when he resumed his first term, I'm talking about Mr. Donald Trump, I mean, so many people resigned. I used to think that how many names I would remember in that who is the Secretary of State, who is the National Security Advisor, who is the CIA chief, who is who. And every third day there was a change, and every second day we would hear another resignation. Now this is reality. Whether you talk about that woman in the UN or Nikki Haley, I mean there's a long list. Now what I'm saying is, sir, this time this man has an experience of 4 years. He knows the trick of the trade and he knows how to run his business. And he cannot be bullied. He can bully. So the second term is going to be slightly different from his first, sir. How do you see that?
First of all, I don't think that he will
internally
win
as well as externally.
first of all, I don't think that he will win a second term. But suppose if he wins, that will be, I think he will play more aggressively, and it will not be good not only for this region. By this region, I mean South Asia, Middle East, but for the world also. I think he's in the last few months, as we have seen, he has very openly and aggressively advocated for Israel's recognition by Arab countries. And if he
he's taken the names that I've spoken to.
Yes, so if he is re-elected, there might be some more countries who will recognize Israel. There is a possibility. So if that happens, that will not be good. Palestinians also. Regarding India also, if Trump wins, I think he will be even more close to Modi and Indian government, and he has already worked on that 4-country alliance like Japan, Australia, India,
Quad.
Quad, yes. So he will more aggressively follow on that also. But discounting that, let's talk about if Biden wins, what will happen.
But sir, the interesting issue would be that just imagine Mark Esper as well as Mike Pompeo, right before the elections, they were both in India and later they went to Sri Lanka also, and they were there for Becca. I mean, the kind of exchange of information, and I mean, it's a very technical subject. But what I'm saying is that if that was the hurry, then they've got 4 more years to strengthen India.
Well,
and it is going to change the balance of power in the entire region, not only here, but even in the eastern side as well.
Yes, and I think, these 4 years don't make him a politician. He was essentially a businessman. He is still a businessman. And in 4 years also, in the past 4 years, he has behaved as a businessman. Now this quickly firing people, just like a businessman. Businessman, if you serve my purpose, you are on job. If you don't serve my purpose, you just go away, you can be fired. So that's how he has behaved in his presidency also. He is not a politician. On the other side, Joe Biden has 40 years of experience in politics. He has been in politics from early 1970s, being a Senate member in 1972 onwards. So he is much more, I think Joe Biden is a much more refined personality, more experienced politician.
But very orthodox also.
He is orthodox, but if you overall look at Democratic Party's policy also, Democratic Party in comparison with Republicans has been slightly, they have played more mature and less aggressive in international politics. If I remind you, it was Democratic President Jimmy Carter who initiated this agreement, Camp David agreement between Israel and Egypt at that time. 1979. And he was also, after this Afghan revolution, Saur revolution in April 1978, there was pressure against him to start intervening there on Jimmy Carter. But he was Democrat, he resisted. But as soon as Ronald Reagan came to power, we see that those 8 years from 1980 to 88, how aggressively they followed their policy in Afghanistan. And because of that policy, we are still suffering. Afghanistan is suffering, Pakistan is suffering. And if you look at Bill Clinton, who was again a Democratic president, he again started encouraging Yasser Arafat and Israeli authorities to start negotiating, you know. So all that shows that if Democratic Party comes to power, even if Joe
Even
Biden
when
is
Barack Obama was in power, sir.
yes, even he look at Iran agreement as Mr. Shiko also talked about that. The Iran deal, I think that was a very positive step forward because Barack Obama, again, he was a mature politician, very articulate. He knew what he was doing. Trump appears to have, you know, he was very impetuous. You know, whatever comes to his mind, he immediately starts doing that. So if he is re-elected, I think that will not be good for this region, for Middle East. But Joe Biden, maybe this is my wishful thinking, but I hope that Joe Biden comes to power and look at Kashmir policy also. I mean, Trump has not condemned Modi at all. In fact, he has encouraged
I think
Modi to do
their
what he
equation
did.
seems to be pretty good, but at the same time, he also appreciates Imran Khan and his efforts for the regional peace. But Howdy Modi, I mean, that is something, you know, he was there, right there, present, right next
Yes,
to him.
yes.
So that makes a lot of difference. Now, ma'am, coming back to you, Barize Omar, couple of points. Now, since Pakistan, obviously as a Pakistani, we always look at the American election from our perspective, from our lens, that what exactly could happen regarding the foreign policy of the Americans and especially regarding the South Asia and in particular by Pakistan. But ma'am, when you are inside America, you would see United States of America from a very different perspective, the internal issues. For example, talk about the economic affairs, the job creation, or you know, looking after the sick industries, getting the business back, or putting a check on the illegal immigrants, and you know, having certain other laws in place as well. I mean, there's a long list. I had to, you know, I'm sure I'll be able to convey this in the right way, that when I was in States in 2007-8, the election was about to be held. Again, it was John McCain, and then we had Sarah Palin from Alaskan side, and we had Joe Biden as the VP, and Mr. Barack Obama as the presidential candidate. And even then, I mean, it was a very interesting election. But there was a time of recession, 2008, if you remember. But this time when I got to talk to my friends, white people or otherwise, they were saying and they were telling me that things are really bad in America regarding the economy because a lot of people are not doing well. Let's throw light on that aspect because that would really matter. For elder people, it could be the health side. For youngsters, it could be the education side. You know, everyone has a different parameter to see how good, bad, or ugly could be the next person in place and in power. Ma'am.
I do just want to make one point in response to what was said before. I think we should recognize that Joe Biden will probably be a one-term president. So yes, he is establishment, but hopefully, if he is elected, he would be a one-term president, and then hopefully steps can be taken to go further away from the center, which people, because this is really a referendum on President Trump, this election. It's not that Joe Biden is necessarily that popular. This is a referendum on President Trump. It's a referendum on the economy, which he claims because of COVID and all of the blue states that have shut down because of COVID, that has destroyed the economy that was picking up. However, the economy was doing better under Barack Obama. He's really ridden on that. His tax cuts did nothing for the average American, and this pandemic has really, really put a dent in employment numbers. It's been the highest unemployment rate recently. Women of color are disproportionately affected in the workforce because a lot of them have to stay home to look after children or family members, and especially given the Affordable Care Act, which is in the courts right now, a lot of people are worried about losing their health care. And this is, I know people who are coming up with end of life plans right now because they have pre-existing conditions and they don't know if they'll be able to get health care if the Affordable Care Act is overturned. That's a major issue that people are voting on. They are also voting on the racial justice issues. And even though the Biden-Harris ticket is not great for people who are affected by systemic violence at the hands of police, for example, it's still better than President Trump. So I think, and the handling of the pandemic, I believe you've already discussed, but it's not just the economic toll. However, conversely, the Trump camp is saying that Trump wants to open up the economy and the Democrats aren't letting him do it. And Trump wants to open up schools and bring people back to work. And the latest chancellor fired Dr. Fauci, and Trump has promised to do so after the election. So his habit of firing people that he doesn't agree with or don't serve his purpose, that's not going to end if he wins another term. I don't think that's going to change.
All right, we have also been joined in by our correspondent Hassan Tariq Butt, live from New York City. He is there to cover the US election. Hassan Tariq, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum Salam, how are you?
Walaikum Salam, how are you?
In New York, man, having a good time, and I'm sure must be learning a lot from this particular US presidential election 2020. So, what's the feel like out there? I'm sure you must have spoken to a lot of people. What exactly is going on? What do you make out of it?
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's very windy and cold right now, but the energy is high. Everyone is bracing themselves for the elections tomorrow, and we have two major candidates for the tomorrow's presidential elections. From the Democratic side, we have Mr. Joe Biden, who has already served as the vice president under the former US President Barack Obama. And on the Republican side, we have the current US President, Mr. Donald Trump. And almost close to 90, maybe up to 95 million people have already cast their votes through pre-balloting and especially through the mail. And, things are heating up as we move close to the elections.
That's pretty interesting. So, primarily, when you talk about New York City, that is, generally speaking, the center for the Democrats. So, just like California, for that matter, out here, I mean, we have also learned that obviously there are a lot of supporters of the other party as well. What about the law and order? Because I've been following the American channels, the British channels, and European channels as well. And, we have heard that there is a very high probability of a clash between the two party workers.
Well, in each state has its own separate environment, especially when we are talking about New York. Right now I'm in Washington DC. This is itself, this area is primarily I would say a Democratic area, and similarly New York, California, all these states are basically Democratic, but then there are some states which are primarily Republican. Where, the thing that we must understand is that the US president isn't elected through the popular vote. It's the electoral college system that actually, casts its vote to select the next president. So as far as the current scenario is concerned, Mr. Joe Biden is up by up to 5 to 8 percentage points. But then again, we saw in 2016, Miss Hillary Clinton was also in the same, was also going through the same situation. In fact, she even won the popular votes by a huge margin of 30 million. So a huge margin of 3 million. Sorry. So we can. It's still up for grabs. There's nothing certain right now. It's the electoral system which will eventually decide who will come on top. And as far as the electoral college is concerned, it's the swing states primarily which influence the outcome.
All right, thank you very much, Hassan, for the update. Now, sir, primarily there was this very interesting story that was about taxes. There was this Biden campaign bus surrounded by the four-wheelers, I don't know, maybe 20 of them, of Trump supporters. And I mean, they were very clearly bullying the bus, and they were coming in front, and they were, trying to create a problem. And when the same question was put to Donald Trump, he said, well, they were escorting them. They were looking after, protecting them. Actually, that was the word he used, protecting them. And now, now this is something which people fear, because, this Black Lives Matters issue plus this particular campaign. People are also very aggressive, and this could trigger anything.
Absolutely. If I may make a very quick point.
Please go ahead.
About what you said earlier. While on the social issues, Trump may be lacking, and in foreign policy he may be found lacking. But there is one community that is really rooting like crazy for Trump, for a second Donald Trump term, and that is the business community, the corporate community of the U.S. What he's done on the fiscal side by giving them tremendous tax breaks, and what Joe Biden is proposing as far as taxes are concerned, there is a world of difference. But I want to come to the question that you posed about Texas. What happened in the final debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump? Joe Biden had a slip of tongue and he said, I am going to demolish the oil and gas industry. It was a slip of tongue, but Texas is all...
Is the hub.
So then later on he cleaned it up by saying, no, what I meant was subsidies. I'm not going to eliminate all oil and the gas resources. But Texas is one state that is really charged up and upset with Joe Biden's outlook on.
You believe that just one statement, can make a difference?
No, Donald Trump has actually guided them to the Republicans. He has changed the culture of the Republican Party. You mentioned the New York elections. I was in Manhattan for those 4 or 5 years and that transition between George Bush and Donald and Al Gore, that election. The things that Republican Party says and does with the phobia against the immigrants, phobia against everyone and against the Mexicans.
But I just want to learn something from you.
Please.
In that particular election, I remember that was very close, and a lot of people thought that maybe Mr. Al Gore could win. And the Florida, was the state which mattered the most at that time. And because it is believed that Mr. Bush's brother was the governor there in Florida, do you think these governors can make the difference? I mean, these things can... I'm not saying that there is a difference. One is can have the influence. The second is that, you're kind of hijacking the election.
Yeah.
I mean, they're two different things.
Of course. The gentleman on the right also made this point about a lot is controlled by the state legislators. So at that time, there were, you might recall, you mentioned earlier about Florida as well, the hanging chads and the electoral votes were counted by hand. All of that was done by the state legislatures. And with tremendous grace, Al Gore backed out of it and gave the...
Yep.
And that grace is not anticipated by from Trump at all. He's been laying the foundations of saying this was rigged for a long time now. He tried to, when seeing that there was not enough support and so much of voting was going to take place by mail, a month ago he tried to gut the postal service of the US. He reduced funding for them by 30%.
He threatened the UN that he is also going to reduce their funding too. I mean, on all the fronts, he's been very aggressive.
Exactly.
That is something which people, maybe because, in diplomacy or in international relations or in holding such positions and the kind of pressure you go through or the kind of decisions you need to make, it's not an easy task at all by any means.
You used a wonderful word just now. He's very aggressive. And that is actually contagious. And that's, you said that the four-wheelers around the bus, that aggressive behavior trickles down from him all the way down to like, this is our right. And we'll fight and we'll do and we'll shoot. And all of this aggression is actually contagious starting from Trump downwards.
All right. Now, Dr. Saab, white vote, women vote, and the youngsters vote. Let's analyze those.
Well, white votes, actually Trump is relying on white majority. So essentially he is just like, again, I will quote, just like Modi and Trump have many things in common. Both rely on majoritarian approach. and targeting the minority, saying that most of the problems that majority is facing, that is because of the minority group. That's what Trump has been doing. So in this election also he tried to do that, and as we saw in the previous past months, when these racial tension intensified, he asked white supremacists to stand by and wait. What that means? That means you stand by, and when the time comes, you come out. And there have been videos in which these white supremacists, they are very well armed. They might trigger some problem if
there were black guys as well with weapons and all, and
Yes.
latest weapons. I mean,
Yes, bullies,
like
thugs.
militias.
Yes, they are thugs. So there is a chance, but I think American system is too strong to tolerate that thuggishness. These rascals, if they even come out on the streets, I don't think that the American state will tolerate this to turn into a wide, rebellion or something like that. They will crush it, and they have to do it. So number one, I
So
don't
no
think
no
that,
more Billy the Kids on the road.
Yes. So number one, I don't think that it will go to that stage, because the margin, I think, and I hope that the margin will be wide enough to prove that Biden wins a clear majority. So
But
if
if
that happens,
it's a close contest, then
let's see. If the margin is wide and Joe Biden wins with wide majority, Trump will lose his justification to incite people to come out on the street. But if the margin is narrow, he might refuse to accept it. But I think that the system is too strong to tolerate that.
well, let's see, sir. Well, ma'am, if I may ask you that, what are the stakes for Pakistan if Biden wins or if Trump wins? Is it going to be something like to jump out of the frying pan into the fire or something?
I don't think so. If I may just respond to something that was said before, though, with the margin, the Republican Party has been playing a long game with what you were asking about, whether the governors have power in the states to affect the elections. The whole blocking of appointing even local district judges by Mitch McConnell during the Obama administration, they made sure to put conservative judges in state legislatures as well, in anticipation, after the 2000 election, in anticipation of elections going into the courts again for vote counts. And so I think that to be wide enough for that to not make a difference. Also, there are international election observers here. There are fewer election observers than there might have been. There are only about 43 of them, I think. But they are keeping a close watch on how the elections are conducted, especially given the mail-in ballot situation. As for Pakistan, I really don't think that there's going to be a huge difference in the way the Democrats versus the Republicans would be with Pakistan, only as a side effect of a less close relationship with India, perhaps. And more, I do think that there is going to be a renewal of the Iran deal. And I think in that situation, there will be a better relationship with Pakistan. But if you remember, President Obama did not really give much attention to Pakistan either. There wasn't a presidential visit. Like, I don't see that there's going to be a significant difference.
And he made too many promises. I still remember he spoke about the Kashmir issue. He spoke about closing down the Guantanamo Bay. He talked about so much more. Couldn't do it. Even the Palestinian issue.
Well, he did. He was vocal about settlements. He was anti-settlement, and given the moving of the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, there's a very marked contrast between the Trump presidency when it comes to Israel and the Obama presidency. So I do think that there's going to be a difference in the Israel issue with the Democrats and the Republicans in this situation as well.
All right, ma'am. Soon we'll be hearing more about the US election from you, and let's see what happens. I mean, I think the next couple of days are very important, very crucial, and pretty interesting as well. Anyway, thank you very much for your presence, ma'am, in the show. It was a pleasure having you, Shikhar Saab, Dr. Saab. It's always good to see you, sir. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you inshallah tomorrow. We'll be further covering the same issue. We'll be throwing more light on the internal impacts of the election, how they are conducted, how well they are received, and what about the behavior of Donald Trump. I think that is going to hold the key. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Khuda Hafiz.